I'm going to assume that you play Terraria because you clicked on this video, so let me just get this out of the way real fast. Here's my base. Building number 1 for all my homies. Underground hotel, above ground hotels, fishing house, art gallery, banner collection, statue collection, storage area, home security system, ultimate fishing pond. Very nice, thank you. All of that is only possible because a man named relogic, who we're gonna call Red, had the idea to make a video game. Red was really inspired by games like Worms, Liero, and Sodalt, games that nobody under the age of 40 has ever heard of. He wanted to grab mechanics from those games and combine it with something more RPG and more sandboxy. Because remember, at this point, Minecraft was not a popular thing. There were no standout sandbox games, procedural generation wasn't a normal thing, and neither was grooming miners. But the second that Minecraft started to gain some ground, Red had a much clearer vision in front of him of what his game could look like. He loved the exploration of Minecraft and the creativity, but he wanted more purpose out of the game. More structure, more goals, more things to be ambitious about, and I feel the same way. There's not enough endgame sort of content, or purpose to work towards. So Red knew that, at least for the game he wanted to make, bosses were going to be a big part of it.
Terraria is basically every game that I wanted to come out in my childhood.
But where was Homeboy going to start with any of this? Red was coming from the Air Force, and he learned all about networking and computers there, but he didn't really touch programming. Lucky for him though, there was the 2007 equivalent of Unity of the day called Microsoft XNA. This was an all-new cutting-edge software that was so amazing and so ahead of its time that it would be discontinued in less than a decade. Conveniently, 2 years after development for Terraria started, but Red obviously didn't know that, so he started working in an engine that was unfortunately destined to die. It's actually really interesting when you look at all the engines that popular indie games have used. It's either some obscure software that you've never heard of, or it's like raw coded in Java. But with an idea as cool as Terraria, Red wasn't alone when he started making this game. 2 guys named Tiyuri and Blue saw the potential and started working with him. But it was never meant to be this big, ambitious game. Development started in January of 2011, and the game came out 6 months later. A small project, nothing super grand, nothing at all that looks like what it is today, but they sold 50,000 copies in the first day, and then 200,000 in the first week. For a game that was fresh off of development for such a small period, those are insane numbers. But it officially stopped development not even a year after its release in 2012. Red decided that it just wasn't worth putting more time into. He wanted to move on to making other games, other projects. This wasn't meant to be the big game. And so Thierry dropped off the team and, well, went off to make his own game. That game was Starbound, by the way, so it's kind of sus that he left Terraria to go and make what is now considered the game's biggest competitor. Anyway, at this point, Terraria was done. relogic was done. But the community for Terraria was not. The game didn't end up stopping there because Red made what is one of the best decisions I think a game developer could do. He let the community help. People were losing all of their marbles for this game, no marbles left, even in its very early stages, and everyone was devastated by its abandonment. So much so that Red would go on to not only allow programmers, but artists and designers to help him revive the project. If he was going to listen to popular demand and keep adding content, he needed an army. These were dedicated people who were eager to see the game thrive, many of which are still with the studio today. These are also the people that have developer sets in-game now. How cool is that? Imagine witnessing the birth of Terraria, watching it die, being one of the people invited to help revive it, and then getting your own item set based off of you. That's pretty cool. So it was back. The project was back, the community was hyped, little 7-year-old me must have been shaking in her boots. So it was now, after coming back from the dead, that Terraria's development was really getting started. Urazer is a notable name who joined the team, I believe coming from the community, and he's responsible for so much of the code being cleaner than it would have been. No offense, Red, I'm just going off of forum posts here. He's now the game's lead programmer, and the studio needed it. Coding is one of those things that you really only get better at by just doing. You won't realize how unstable a system in your game is until you try to make it more advanced later on. And that's one of the things that early Terraria faced when Urazer was able to look at the existing code and go, guys, what the heck? I'll break this down for you real simply. See, Terraria is written in C#. C# has these things called objects. An object is like a cat, which has traits. It is furry, it is mean, and your girl's allergic to it. And this is true for all cats. Terraria does not have cats exactly, but it does have items, like a torch, a table, or a Terra toilet. These items all have their own traits, and in order to track them and use them throughout the rest of the code, they need an ID. Keeping track of the IDs for 5 items? Great, easy. 100 items? Okay, 4,000 items? What happens when the programmer needs to modify the state of a torch? Okay, they've got to go figure out what number corresponds to what item, cross-reference that everywhere, manipulate it. It was bad. And so how about instead of this, we do this? Wow. See, even if it takes more time to do that second one, it is so worth it in the long haul, especially when your game is going to scale as much as Terraria did. That is the hurdle in game development known as optimization. That should give you an idea of how continuously evolving the code behind a game is and how invisible stuff like that can be from a player perspective. Optimized, future-proof code is hard to make, and for a lot of fresh developers like Red, it's hard to do because you just don't know that it's a thing. You don't know that this thing can be done better or that it should be. Especially with how small Terraria was meant to be, there wasn't really a need originally for it to be super efficient. But lo and behold, it sure got bigger. Another early unoptimized system in Terraria was the project's organization. There's a lot of software out there made to help you as a game developer because of how much there is to manage. Tracking progress with your visuals, your code, communicating across developers, making sure people are on the same page, all of that. The bigger the project, the harder it gets. But up until 2019, all of Terraria's organization was managed in a Google spreadsheet. Not even Excel, just plain old Google Sheets. They ended up switching to some software, but I genuinely cannot fathom that. But for as long as they needed to, I guess they made it work. The game was developing more, the organization behind it all was coming together, but the game's artwork. The artwork, well, the old art actually wasn't that bad for Terraria. There's not a lot of footage of old Terraria out there, but even in its early stages, it's still very much Terraria. Most games endure some massive graphic overhaul and you can see the sprites getting better over time, but Terraria has really gone strong the whole time. It definitely did improve, but to me it's not really that noticeable. This also might be part of why people who played the game 10 years ago still enjoy it now. It's never not felt familiar. Part of why I'm scared to play a new Minecraft world is because the game is getting increasingly unrecognizable. It's intimidating for someone like little old me. Updates are obviously good, but like, who is he? What is that? Why is the entire art style completely changing, guys? Not to say Terraria isn't intimidating, obviously newer content does look like this. But even this art could easily mesh into the art from 10 years ago. And that's something really neat that we don't see a lot in video games that have been out for such a long time. So the art was great, but he was missing what many programmers and developers are still to this day lacking: women. But he was a blessed man, and he soon met a fellow game enthusiast named Sanks. Sanks would go on to play not only a key role in designing Terraria, but would also marry him. Allow me to narrate the story of how they met, quoted directly from Sanks. The first time I met Red, I was working at GameStop, and he had flown out to meet with his best friend who just happened to be my best friend that he had met while in the Air Force. He came in bragging about Terraria being in beta, and I was bragging about having beta access to Diablo 3. A year later, we met again and hit it off immediately. He showed me Terraria, and I didn't really get it, and didn't fully understand that he was the man behind everything that made it work. So man's got roasted and found the love of his life in a single moment. It's pretty good. But a couple that's now married with kids, having met over a love of video games? Guys, that's my jam, that's my goal. So Red's got Sanks and Eraser and a bunch of other dedicated people passionate about making Terraria something great. And progress came, from my understanding, pretty fast. Sanks has been kind enough to reveal to us a lot of the game design side of things, which I think can be brushed over a lot. You know that, okay, you're gonna need to learn to code, do art, make music, whatever, but designing actual fun mechanics, coordinating boss fights, progression, world layouts, UI, All of that stuff is game design. Like, for example, Terraria once had the unreleased ability to grapple to trees, which Red said was super fun, but it just turned out to be more annoying than anything because you just kind of go Tarzan on accident. There's also weapon dyes, which were too visually yucky, levels, and a rain collection system that never debuted. There was even a boss named Okram that made it into the game, but it was ultimately removed because the fight just wasn't a good enough fit for the game. All of those things were implemented enough to where the art was made, they were coded in, only for the developers to realize that they just weren't what they expected them to be. And that's not bad. It's a sad but inevitable part of game development that Red quickly became familiar with, the lovely and devastating process of trial and error. It does serve as a nice reminder, though, that even if something isn't final in your game, that doesn't mean you didn't learn anything from it. Without those foundational steps, you would never get better. But one thing that can make that process a little easier for you is today's sponsor, Brilliant. Brilliant is a platform where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in math, data analysis, programming, and AI. Every lesson gives you hands-on exercises that train your brain 6 times faster than lectures do, and in a much more fun way. And there's no memorization involved. You're building real problem-solving and logic skills with lessons written by award-winning professionals. It's only a couple minutes out of your day that you can do whenever, wherever, to slowly build good habits instead of, I don't know, doom scrolling. Here's the lesson that I'm doing right now on probability. I have never taken a proper probability class in my life, but I'm already learning how to quickly analyze data, visualize it, and make more informed decisions. Spending the time to learn to think critically like this is gonna make me a much better programmer who can do things a lot faster, so I'm excited to see how much more progress I'll make. To try everything Brilliant has to offer, free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/juniperdev or click on the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. But now, what about Terraria's soundtrack? Well, it was all made by a single man named Scott Lloyd Shelley, the most Australian name you will ever hear. And he was Australian.
I try to go quick and not try to overanalyze, like a lot of Americans do tend to, like to form committees and overanalyze stuff, and let's analyze it into the toilet.
He's a cool sounding dude too. When he was asked in an interview about where he got his inspiration from for the Terraria soundtrack, he said, "This probably sounds trite, but my inspiration comes from the source of all creativity. I just try to be receptive and let it happen. I've tried to force it, but the best stuff just comes. After viewing early artwork, playing the early build of Terraria, and listening to some examples, I felt it needed to be sparse, open, adventurous, somewhat retro, but unique and modern as well." I based my Australian accent solely off of Sky from Valorant, by the way, so hope that was good. It's awesome to hear from the composer himself, though, that it's really just all about the vibes, I guess. The game really wouldn't be the same without its music. You could listen to the music from boss fights or different biomes and know that they're part of the same game because the style is that consistent. They all use the same sort of sounds, similar instruments, I think. They really do all have that retro feel that just feels like Terraria. But what also makes Terraria what it is today is the stream of never-ending updates we've gotten ever since the game came back to life in 2012. Because remember, the game ended in 2012, but then popular demand brought it back in 2013. And then in 2019, the devs were like, okay, we're done, no more. And then Journey's End came out, and that update was obviously called Journey's End because it's supposed to be the end of the journey, no more content, they're all done. Except 2022, we got more updates, and then to this day, we are still getting more stuff. And that's just so funny because it's normally the opposite with game studios. They'll say, okay, we're gonna release a game by the end of the year, and then that date gets pushed farther and farther back. But Red is like, okay, we're gonna stop updating. And then they keep updating. But hey, I'm not complaining. I will take it. Even if they don't release more updates, the modding community for this game really started to emerge early on. Another smart decision on the dev side, full script mod support. The first ever notable mod was a horse mod that looked like this. Lovely. Then Calamity was released in 2016 and has been continuously updated, and so has Thorium. Those are two of the biggest mods out there that add a ton of new stuff. It's honestly worth playing the entire game all over again just to experience those. Lots of smaller updates and integrations have also come along in recent years. It was ported to Switch, we got controller support, there was a golf update. At one point, Red was asked if there was anything too goofy or immature to add that they wanted to, but Red was like, dude, Just look at the items that we have in game. You got morning wood, masturbate, golden showers, you can strap dynamite to bunnies. I guess that's kind of the beauty of having your own game. You can just kind of put whatever you want in it. With the more major stuff though, like platform integration and controller support, the unoptimized code that we talked about earlier proved itself to be a challenge. But they did it, and the game is now the most accessible it's ever been. So much so that by May of 2022, Terraria had sold over 44 million copies across all platforms. That is hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue for a $10 game, and Red himself admitted that we could have charged 50 cents for the 1.3 update and made millions, and people would have been fine with it. But we don't need to. Isn't that wild? They could have charged for all those updates they did over the span of over 10 years, but why would they? They said we already made enough money, and we don't even need to charge more than $10 for the game. Ted Murphy, who's the head of business, even described how it was kind of spontaneous. The fans supported us along the way, which allowed us to do things in a way where we weren't charging for DLC, doing microtransactions, or any of that mess. We can keep giving content, and they keep giving us the love, support, and sales that we need to keep going as a company and developing the game. That's awesome, and that's a shared goal for a lot of noble indie game developers. So is it finally done? After 10 years of updates, millions of dollars in sales, and winning the Labor of Love award on Steam? What's next? Red's certainly got plans on working on more games, but even he recognizes that after 12 years, the game still sells like hotcakes. There's so much demand that it makes it hard to move on. Well, in 2015, Relogic announced Terraria Otherworld, which was meant to be kind of a spin-off, sequel-ish thing, but they ended up canceling it in 2018 and pushing a lot of the game's content into the Journey's End update. Red did announce, though, at one point that if someone made a petition and got 100,000 signatures and $15, he'd open source the code for Otherworld. The largest petition is only at 1,500 signatures though, because it wasn't a super popular thing, but you know, I think it's the thought that counts. That's a Chad move. I think that no matter what happens, there's still a ton to look forward to, and a lot of Terraria that I still have left to play. I have like 400, 500 hours. I obviously made that incredible base at the start of the video. You're so welcome for that. But I haven't technically beaten Plantera yet, so that's probably the next thing on my to-do list. If you did enjoy, it would mean the world if you subscribed, or if you want to join the Discord server in the description. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!